Louise, Energy and Utility Skills, discusses the findings of the 2022 Inclusion Measurement Framework report. The energy and utility sector might still be white male-dominated, but progress is being made, with Louise optimistic that there is a very real, industry-wide commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion, explaining the actions organizations can take to make a positive difference.
Okay, so energy and utility skills, you fairly recently published your 2022 Inclusion Measurement Framework results, and I think it's the third time you've done it, so I guess it'd be just an obvious place to start. How does it compare this year to the first couple you did?
It's a little bit difficult to compare year on year in its simplest terms because we made a number of changes to the framework. So for the first time, we've been able to look at organisation and sector-wide data, which we weren't able to do in the previous ones. And we extended the reach of the leadership survey from chief executives also to leaders. So when we look at those measures in the framework year on year, encouragingly, we can see an increase in the proportion of women who are attending leadership development programs. So we can expect, hopefully at least, to see that translate into leadership positions in time. And we've seen a very small increase in the numbers of women being promoted, so very encouraging. But conversely, we've seen the proportion of ethnic minority colleagues in the sector attending leadership development, and we've seen that come down. So there's been no real shift in the numbers of ethnic minorities being promoted. But what we can also see, and this has been year on year, is the significant dilution of ethnic minority candidates in the selection process. So we can see that right across that recruitment process. And when we've extended the leadership survey from chief executives to include leaders, we can see that women are making up 30 or just under 31% of the leadership population versus 22% of chief executives. And what we can see is ethnic minorities. There were no ethnic minority chief executives. We can see that they make up 4.6% of the leadership population.
Okay, and in terms of the overall, I suppose, landscape, is it fair to say that you discovered that the industry, energy, utility sector is still fairly much white male dominated? Is that still the case?
Yeah, that's absolutely still the case. So when we look at the sector as a whole, the proportion of women, particularly in the water sector, that's around 28% at the moment. And whilst that's above the wider utility sector, particularly notably above gas and the supply chain, the proportion of women working in water is still significantly behind that of the UK workforce, which is around 48%. And when we look at ethnic minorities in water, that's about 8% of the workforce. And whilst again, that's higher than the wider utility sector, it's still significantly below the 13% that make up the UK's workforce.
And I think, it may not be a substantial amount, but I think you also discovered that there were slightly fewer women and ethnic minorities overall working in the sector compared to the previous year. I say, is that something to be worried about, or is it just, is it a very small reduction and therefore, no cause for alarm?
It's difficult to draw any one conclusion from that. I think there are a number of contributing factors. So we can look at the diversity of leavers. So we can see that women, ethnic minorities, and those aged under 36 are leaving at higher rates than are represented in the workforce. What we can't see is if they're leaving the industry as a whole, or are they just leaving the organisation that they work for. And actually for women and those under 36, we can also see that they're leaving at higher rates than they're joining. So we're not going to really see that shift in the diversity of the workforce. But it's key to look at those factors that are contributing. So what are the reasons why diverse talent is leaving the industry? So is it they're leaving to join other parts of the industry? Is it that the culture's not right? And that's a question we're asking in this year's survey. And then when we look at the diversity of applicants, at Energy and Utility Skills, we run a website called Energy and Utilities Jobs, and we see about 46% of visits to that site are from women, but only about 22% of applicants into the sector are from women. So women are looking at careers in the sector, but they're then not applying for roles. So what is it? Is it the job titles? Is it the shift patterns? What could be contributing to that? So when you look at all of those contributing factors, that can help to start to explain, but there's no one real reason as to why it's not really shifting.
Okay, and I think you also discovered that there's a significantly low representation when it comes to LGBTQ plus people in the sector. Again, I mean, did you discover the reason for that, or you just found the statistic and therefore you might explore that more in subsequent surveys?
Simply the declaration rates are really, really low, so we don't have a true reflection in my view. And when you look even at the census data, it's only in 2021 that we asked about that for the first time. So whilst over half of leaders and individuals in the sector don't declare their sexual orientation, what we can see is that they're making up 2.8% of the leadership population. So when you look at the census data, actually that's really encouraging, which identified that 3.2% of the population identifies as LGBTQ+. So actually it's near reflection of the population, but there is definitely some work to do around about declaration rates.
And maybe completing the equality, diversity and inclusion picture. And when it comes to disabled people, I think again the report identifies that they're significantly underrepresented in the sector. Again, just thoughts as to what's behind that.
Again, similar to sexual orientation, the declaration rates are really low, and you can take a fair bit from that. So what is it that means that individuals don't feel comfortable to share their sexual orientation or their health? So again, we can see there's about 1.7% of the sector has a declared disability. That's 17% in the UK workforce, but 66% don't declare either way. So when we look again at ONS data, it suggests we're not far from the UK workforce. So the ONS data for the sector suggests that 15% of the workforce has declared disability. You look at the declaration rates, it shows you how far away we are from getting an accurate picture. So again, it's definitely a declaration issue, and there's more that we can do to really instill some trust so that individuals working in the sector feel comfortable declaring their disabilities or their sexual orientation.
I'm just wondering, in terms of the industry sector, I mean, there's potentially quite a lot of, as you say, your awkward shift patterns. There's quite a lot of manual work. I mean, is the industry able to sort of defend itself against accusations of not having, the right amount of diversity, equality, inclusion, just because of the nature of a lot of the roles, or is it no longer, is that, if it ever was, is that no longer a justification which they can kind of hide behind, if you like?
I don't believe it's a justification, but we can hide behind. And it's only a few weeks ago I was at a conference in the sector, and we were celebrating female PPE. And you think, we're in 2023, how are we now celebrating female PPE? Why has that not been a thing for a long time? But there are many unfounded perceptions of the sector. So if you look at sector imagery, if you look at how it's represented in the press, it's going to put people off applying as well. I mentioned just earlier about 46% of those visits to the website for energy and utilities jobs are from women. So there's something putting women off, but it absolutely can't be a defence that it's the hours, or it's the shift patterns, or it's the outside nature of the work. It could also be that it's difficult to find someone like me, whether that be in the type of role that you're looking for, whether you're looking at the leadership population. I see the sectors doing some great things. They are changing shift patterns. They are making significant changes to the language used in job adverts and in the descriptions of roles. There is more to do, but if we try harder to change the perception and the understanding of the numbers and the types of roles and the contribution that individuals can make to the environment or to the wider net zero, then there's opportunities to have a fantastic career working in the industry.
And do you think, by and large, I don't know if the report found it or just anecdotally, do you think that most of the sector is aware of its shortcomings, shall we say, and is working to address those, or do you still perhaps, slightly depressingly find pockets of resistance that know, the nature of the job? It's it's got to be blokes on site or whatever. Do you still encounter those attitudes, or have we got beyond that at least, so people are working towards a better EDI sort of outcome?
It's interesting, when I joined the industry, it's now scarily 12 years ago. I remember going to a meeting. I think I'd been in the organisation about 6 months, and somebody in a meeting said, well, the trouble with women, they don't like these dirty jobs. And that's 12 years ago, and I remember being stunned and actually couldn't respond to the comment, and somebody else did, because I was still thinking through how I could respond to that politely. And I do see now, so the sector's inclusion commitment, we've got 56 organisations committed to that. The business case for EDI is well articulated, being representative of the communities that the sector serves is well communicated. And in the inclusion measurement framework, where it is self-reported by leaders in that leadership survey, we can see nearly 90% of leaders can articulate that importance of EDI, and nearly 90% personally ensure that it's an expectation of their leaders, it's a priority in their organisation. And an underpinning principle of that is to measure and be transparent, and the numbers of organisations now participating in that framework, particularly as we look at the 2023 data submission rates, I see as really encouraging. Is there more to do? Absolutely, there's more to do. But the commitment and the business case is there. It's just going to take some time to truly translate into the changes in data.
So I perhaps should have asked at the start, but in terms of who you talk, when we're talking about the energy and utility sector, are we purely talking about the big, utility companies, or are you also talking about the supply chains? You're talking about contractors as well?
Yeah, also the contractors as well. So our membership footprint moves really to sort of tier 1, tier 2 contractors, but encouragingly what we can see are lots of the trade bodies and supply chain organisations beneath that participating in the framework and participating in the inclusion commitment. And when you're working in partnership with institutions like British Water and the Institute of Water as well, and seeing their commitment to their membership footprints to diversity and inclusion as well, you know that it's an industry-wide commitment.
And I know the report makes some recommendations to help companies, improve their EDI strategy. So perhaps you could, I think it was 5. So perhaps you can just outline what those are, what companies can do.
Yeah, so one of the things, having identified that significant dilution of ethnic minority candidates coming through the recruitment process, a definite recommendation to review recruitment practices. We can see anecdotally from talking to the industry that some of that will be individuals from applying outside of the UK. So some of that will be an automatic sift, or they might be out of operating regions. But there is definitely still something that's deselecting ethnic minority candidates as they come through. So really to have a look at those recruitment practices. Targeted development programs, that's not necessarily a female leadership development program, but it's about targeting to ensure that you've got a diverse population going on development programs. But also I've talked a couple of times about the low levels of declaration rates. So what can organisations do to build trust in sharing data and reducing the levels of non-declared data and the prefer not to say, so that we can really get a more accurate picture of what the industry looks like. There's definitely something in the role of leaders in doing that and building that trust and building the culture that really fosters inclusion. And in my view, that's right across the organisation. So you look at leaders of an organisation, you look at leaders of people, where actually the translation of that strategy often has to happen, and how you work with operational teams. But as individuals, we've also got a role to play in leading inclusion, whether that's calling out behaviours, it's checking our own behaviours, or really just trying to get more of a curious mindset about inclusion. And also to have a look at why we're losing disproportionately that diverse talent. If it is that they're moving on to other roles in the industry, then that's actually something to celebrate. But if we're losing individuals and they're leaving the industry, then we really need to understand the reasons why.
And in terms of where the energy utility sector compares to, have you done some benchmarking with other industries? I mean, is it below the average? Is it above? Was it how does it compare EDI wise with other industry sectors?
It's not dissimilar, particularly if we look at adjacent industries. So one of the areas we've been working with in energy and utilities is just trying to look across different industries. So yes, there's the wider energy and utilities sector, and actually water is doing pretty well, particularly in comparison to gas and to its supply chain. But if you look at adjacent industries like transport and wider infrastructure type projects, it's not a million miles dissimilar. But when you look at the workforce as the UK as a whole, then we are significantly behind. In some areas, not a million miles behind in disability, but we are in terms of gender, ethnicity, and a lot of the other protected characteristics. So in all cases, it's not bad news, but there is definitely some movement to be made, whether that's comparing ourselves with adjacent industries or ONS.
And in terms of the future, I mean, are you optimistic that there is the appetite for change? And I think you alluded to earlier, board, if it doesn't happen at the board, it's unlikely to happen sort of bottom up with an organisation. So that level of commitment. And I suppose from that, if you repeat the exercise next year, will you be disappointed if the dial hasn't moved at all? Or just thoughts, I suppose, as to how you see the future and maybe even the rate of prayer. I mean, is it acceptable that it's going to very slowly, or do you think there needs to be a bit more of a sort of seismic shift to get things up to speed?
Oh, good question. So there's a few things in there. So we're a sector that has long-serving workforce. So we will see some of that workforce move on over the next 5 or so years. So it provides an opportunity. If we're bringing in diverse talent, we'll start to see that shift. But what we do know is there's a massive skills gap. If we're going to deliver the needs of the industry, the skills needs of the industry, then we've got a lot to do. So in my view, it's not going to change quickly, but what I think will happen is we'll start to see the regular incremental shifts. So we will see, particularly as the legacy, as you talked about, white male workforce start to move on and retire and become the mentors of new entrants into the industry. What we do in terms of that recruitment and that development of diverse talent, so that we're recruiting, developing and retaining diverse talent, we will see it in my view, but it's going to take some time for it really to filter through.
I'm just wondering as well, this might be a silly question, but a lot of the companies, only the water companies, you took as them sort of semi-monopolies. So do you think there's any part of them that thinks they or they don't go as fast? Because I know in should we say more competitive markets, EDI, a very diverse workforce is really important to make sure you understand your customers fully. But if you're a water company and you've got a locked-in set of customers, you maybe don't have to make the same effort to appeal. Is there anything in that, or you don't think that's particularly relevant?
I don't think that's true. There's a few things in there. I think increasingly investors are looking at workforce resilience, and so is the regulator, quite rightly. So that's got to have diversity threaded through it, and there are lots of measures that I would expect investors and certainly Ofwat would want to see. But we're ultimately providing services to every household, every business in the UK, and if we're going into people's houses, we want to be representative and understanding of their differences, so their cultural beliefs or the differences in their household. So we can't really be the industry that can do that unless we represent the communities that we serve. So yes, a business case, a financial case, a regulatory case, but moreover, it's about we're providing ultimately a service to every household, every business, and why would we not want to be reflective of that?
Well, that makes sense. I mean, it's been great to chat to you and some really fascinating information. So, Louise, I really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you.